Okay, I'm going to give you my top 5 best investments for the rest of this decade and my top 5 worst investments for the rest of this decade. But first I'm going to give you this little example here. Suppose you have $100,000 of cash and you live in Arizona. You have this dilemma. Do you buy a house with all cash, or do you loan the money? You have a friend who wants to buy a house and he has bad credit, and you can loan him the money at 5%, and he then will have 100% ownership in the house, and you will own 100% of this bond, which you make the loan at $100,000. Now, since interest rates are at 60-year lows, in the last major, I'm talking about major housing crisis of the 60s, from 66 or 75, the last major housing crisis, interest rates got down, people got home loans in the 5s and 6s. But the 3s and 4s, they didn't get the home loans that low. But in this housing recession of the 2010s, people got 3 and 4% interest rate loans. I have a loan that's in the 3%. That's 3 3/4 fixed, and I have another one that's 4.9 fixed on a rental property. And so what happens is when the interest rates in the next housing boom in 2015, all the foreclosures will be sold off, and you'll have another housing boom. You say, how can you be so sure? It's actually very, very simple. The U.S. population between the 1980 and 2010 census went up 90 million Americans in 30 years. The average U.S. population grows 3 million per year. Since 2.5 people live in one residence on the average, 1.2 million new residences can be sold per year, can be built and sold per year. 1.2 million. Well, in the last few years, we've seen over 400,000 in 2013. We saw, what was it, 367,000 in 2012. 2011, I believe, it was 304,000. And so we see 1/6, 1/7 the construction of what we had in 2006 at the peak. And so we're actually underbuilding by about, when the housing crisis is over, when they solve the last foreclosure in 2015, we'll actually be 8 million homes underbuilt. 800,000 times 10 years is 8 million homes, which will not be able to be built in a year. So that's why we're going to be underbuilt, and we're going to have another housing cycle. And so when that housing bubble, when that housing upwave does occur, the government will raise rates to try and slow down the runaway, the jump in housing prices. This is what they do to try and control inflation. They believe that too much inflation too fast will cause a sharp drop and will be very, very bad for the economy. So they will definitely raise rates. So since we're at 60-year lows in interest rates, easily rates will go up to 10%, easily. Well, this $100,000 bond, this $100,000 that you loaned, in a 10% interest environment, the loan that's only producing 5% will now only sell for $50,000. I mentioned this in a video a year ago, and someone said, that doesn't matter. I can just wait till the interest rates go back down, and it will jump back down to 100,000. Well, that might be true, but let's look at this. Over the 10 years, 15 years that you're waiting for the interest rates to go back down, at some point they will go back down to 5%. Your $50,000 bond, your $100,000 bond that dropped to $50,000, that's producing 5% a year, goes back to 100,000. Now, the home that you could have bought in Arizona at 100,000, that used to be 200,000, that's 100,000. That goes back to 200,000 in price. Then it jumps 5 times in price in the next housing boom. It goes to $1 million. So where you could have owned a home that's now worth $1 million and have $900,000 of equity, instead you now have this bond of 100,000, which is only 10% of a house. Where you could have had 100% ownership in a house, now you only have 10% ownership you only have a down payment. So where you had a tremendous amount of money, where you could have bought a home all cash, Now you can only have a down payment for a home if you do this, if you believe in bonds. So this basic premise shows us that real estate is a tremendous investment due to leverage, where the person that loans you the money, their capital is being devaluated due to inflation, but your home, your capital investment is going up. This is called leverage. Okay? And on the other side of the coin, bonds, loaning money, will be a very, 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 very bad investment in a rising rate environment. And so people have said, oh, people have been saying that for 30 years, but this is finally it, okay? Bonds are going to be the worst investment 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Very, very, very bad investments. And people that look at Robert Shiller's the Case-Shiller Index and say, he's adjusted for inflation and real estate only goes up 1% a year. Well, that doesn't take into account cash flow on rentals, and it doesn't take into account leverage. If you actually buy a home with all cash, you have 100% ownership in the house, and 10, 15 years later, you still have ownership in the house. You really haven't made any money. But if you buy it with a down payment, you have tremendous leverage. So taking this into account now, let's go into the top, my top 5 investments and my top worst investments for the rest of the decade. My 5 best investments for 2014 on are, of course, real estate. Real estate's an inflationary hedge, which you have the advantage of leverage, and when real estate is rising, leverage is working fantastic for the owner, okay? I own 3 properties, and they're going up $50,000 a year, so I'm essentially saving up more money in real estate than I am making in my salary, okay? Gold, of course, is also another good inflationary hedge, which should rise which should do very, very well the rest of this decade. You also have banks and insurance companies like the XLF Mutual Fund, Bank of America, which is a laggard. I also like Credit Suisse, which is another big laggard. You have home builders like the XHB ETF and KB Homes, another laggard. They should do very, very well when construction does well. First, solar companies should do well. Things related to housing, companies that sell, curtains and furniture, you would expect a lot of those things to do very, very well. Building materials, like cement, lumber, steel, those will also do well. Okay, I should have put on here gold and silver. Those should also do well in an inflationary environment. The 5 worst investments for 2014 of course, are bonds. We say bonds, $100,000 bond is going to go down to $50,000. You're going to just get smashed. And if rates go over 10%, that $50,000 bond is going to drop down to $30,000. That's going to be a very, very, very bad investment. Now, here I have 4 sectors of the 4 industries in the stock exchange. Airlines, auto manufacturers, retail, and entertainment. Now, airlines and auto manufacturers many of these companies owe 50 times the value of their assets to the banks. So when the government raises rates in the next real estate boom, airlines and auto manufacturers are going to be in bankruptcy and are going to be forced to lay off. Also, retail stores and entertainment, they owe like 30 times the value of their assets to the banks. So, retail, they employ 12 million Americans, so there's going to be some layoffs there. There's going to be a lot of, I've been telling the people in Albertsons, I've been telling them that their company is going to change ownership the second half of this decade, because there's just no way that they can, save up $10 million a year, a company of that size, with like a 0.1% net profit, and be able to compete. When interest rates rise, they're not going to be able to pay the interest on their debt. They just do not have the money to pay the interest on their debt. So you also have Safeways, and Food for Less, Kroger. You have a lot of other retail. You also look at JCPenney's and Sears. I would not touch them, and Kmart. I wouldn't touch them at all. I would try and stick with what is going to do well, and I'm likely to take out loans and buy more real estate and use increased leverage. Remember, leverage is working for the owner when prices are rising, but working against the owner when prices are falling. And typically, because we've had a 10-year recession in real estate from 2006 through 2015, we're very likely to have a 10-year inflationary upleg from 2016 through 2025. Real estate is going to be a fantastic place to have your money. But these places are going to be a very lousy place to have your money, and you should just simply avoid them. Notice that we have here airlines, auto manufacturing, and retail. Airlines, auto manufacturing, and retail, these three industries, Warren Buffett says that those are the economics in these industries are very, very hard due to the price competition. Airlines the government lets them go into bankruptcy and operate with ticket costs that are below the actual price of operations, and this causes tremendous downward pressure on the other airlines. Okay, and so you also have auto manufacturers and retail, very, very tough economics in these industries. Warren Buffett says to stay away from these unless you really know what you're doing. Airlines, auto manufacturers, and retail. Once Warren Buffett bought a 129 department store, and he eventually got rid of it because he said, you know, your competitor puts in air conditioning, you have to put in air conditioning. Your competitor puts in escalators, you have to put in escalators. They're just throwing these things at you, and they remodel. You know, you have to remodel. You just can't wait. You just have to constantly keep up with the competition, and if you don't, you'll just be history. Okay, so airlines, auto manufacturers, and retail, Warren Buffett says to be very, very careful with these three because the economics of them are just very, very difficult due to price competition. So I hope you like my video, the 5 best investments for 2014 on, and the 5 worst investments for 2014 on. Have a nice year, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.